Alright everyone, hello and welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today is the 22nd of November, and we recently just had Pluto ingress into Aquarius, which has been a pretty big deal because Pluto spends a lot of time in Aquarius. It's interesting because I've been, I have to admit, I only started getting to astrology more seriously back around 2017. I'm still pretty new at this, and I've been watching some other astrologers who are more experienced and kind of brushing up on some of this. And one of the things that I noticed is that, for listening to some other people talk, is that Pluto spends a lot more time in Aquarius than other signs because Pluto does not have the same kind of orbit on the ecliptic as the other planets have. That Pluto is kind of wonky in that it kind of goes like up and down, and I don't know. It's not really my forte, but because of the unique orbit of Pluto, for example, if you're going to compare it to Scorpio, it spends a lot shorter period of time in signs like Scorpio and Libra than it does for like Capricorn and Aquarius. So we've just gone through the America's Pluto return, and there's this kind of like association with Pluto and also Aquarius usually stands for things like governments, systems, and the kinds of like hidden power structures in systems of governments. And we just had this election, and obviously there's a lot of drama going around with politics, and I don't really want to feed into that. But today I'm actually noticing the archetype in some other different ways, and I thought I would get into it. And also keeping in mind, of course, that we have a Mars retrograde coming up. Mars in Leo retrograding. I think this is December 7th. So coming up pretty soon, but Mars retrogrades take a long time, so we might as well get into it. A Mars retrograde in Leo, in an opposition to this Pluto in Aquarius, which is just recently ingressed. And there are certain things in my own personal life, the way Aquarius is in my chart, and the influence of Aquarian personalities in my own life, with Pluto kind of resonating with this, right? The Pluto, of course, being another name for Hades, the Lord of the underworld, the Lord of the dead, and all this kind of stuff. And with all that kind of resonance in mind, I can't help but have on my mind recently my father who passed away, who was an Aquarius, and also the grandmother from that side of the family was also an Aquarius. And so there's a strong Aquarius association with my dad and his mother and that side of the family, and then with this kind of thing recently where you've got Donald Trump and all the politics and stuff like that. There's a certain kind of thing for me that goes with the governmental power, structural power, but there's also this kind of sort of like Aquarian aloofness, or there's like a kind of Aquarian kind of like the myth of Aquarius is the guy as the cupbearer, right? And the cupbearer is somebody who is in service to the king, and so there's a certain kind of like being in service to some kind of ideal or higher principle or something like that you can kind of glean from Aquarius. But the Pluto is kind of like this, the underworld of like old treasures or things like that, right? And now I was just thinking, I'm kind of leading into this because I have to admit that when it comes to this Mars and Pluto, there's a tendency when you're trying to interpret this to get into a conversation around power, and I have not strayed away from this. I have embraced the fact that there's power with Mars and Pluto, also with Scorpio, right? Because Scorpio is traditionally a Mars sign, some certain modern astrologers like to associate Pluto with it. Whatever way you go with, both these scorpionic planets, Pluto and Mars, are going to be in this opposition in Aquarius, right? And having this sort of like underworld process with power and all this. I have something that I just discovered because my mom's cleaning up. She's going to be giving things away, and what I found was this. These are a collection of old Tony Robbins cassette tapes called Personal Power, a 30-day process for unlimited success. Now, when I first saw these, I realized that my dad was influenced by this kind of stuff. My dad, who was an Aquarius guy, who passed away back in 2013, and there's a certain, I don't know if it's like a generational thing, or this is like a kind of like, it's kind of interesting anyways, I think, because there's a certain kind of underlying dynamic, like with what I'm trying to do as being an astrologer, and what kind of motivates me in this direction, but then also the kind of obstacles that I've encountered in really committing to doing an astrology practice seems kind of relevant to the role of this kind of stuff in my own life, right? Because I remember, my dad was the kind of guy who had his own business as a chiropractor and often would go to these kind of conventions, and there'd be this kind of like these personal development things for like self, empowerment and success and stuff like that. And I just thought this was really interesting, first of all, because I was under the impression that these were my dad's old Tony Robbins tapes. I asked my mom if she minded if I just used these in a video, and she said that these didn't actually belong to my dad, but rather that my mom found these in a thrift store and picked them up because they reminded her of my dad, who passed away in 2013. So I was under the impression that my mom was like going through my dad's old stuff and making some progress getting rid of my dad's belongings, but these aren't actually. So I was kind of like, a little bit let down, because my whole premise was like, oh man, I could do this like my Aquarian father and the riches that my Aquarian father has left behind for me to find. But it's not, but in a way it was like the sentiment, right? The sentiment that my dad was into stuff like this, at motivating my mother to just collect more of this junk that basically she hides in closets. So instead of actually being able to let go of my dad's old possessions, we can just accumulate more of it, right? And we can accumulate stuff that my dad never owned, in the image of my father who hasn't been with us for over a decade, right? And there's some if you take a closer look at this kind of stuff, tape 1. It's called Unleash Your Personal Power. And if you look at the back, we have Tony Robbins, a very young looking guy. I just looked at his chart. Tony Robbins he's a Pisces, and he has Venus and Mars and Chiron in Aquarius. He was born in 1960, so that makes him younger than my dad. My dad, who isn't with us anymore, but Tony Robbins still is. And if you look at, I was also noticing that Tony Robbins was described as basically being like a life coach, right? And there's a kind of this underlying kind of idea that a successful astrologer practice is not just divining the stars, but it's being a life coach, as if you were Tony Robbins or something like that, right? But this is a kind of something I run into because I really just don't like Tony Robbins very much. And it's something that's kind of just accepted as this sort of I'll keep another one. How to shape your destiny now, right? Of not being just a passive, as Tony Robbins says here, the past does not equal the future. That you don't have to just give in to your fate, your destiny. You have to take take the bull by the horns kind of thing, right? That's kind of the empowerment attitude of a Mars retrograde and Mars opposite Pluto. Another one. How to get what you really want. And it says, There is no greatness without a passion to be great, whether it's the aspiration of an athlete or an artist, a scientist, a parent, or a businessman. We also have the ultimate secret for lifelong success. In my dad's case, this was less than 60 years old for lifelong success. But, you know, it's still, he was successful, right? I mean, you can be successful for as long as he was alive. Nothing has any power over me other than that which I give it through my conscious thoughts. How to create a compelling future. A new way to set and achieve goals. People are not lazy. They simply have impotent goals. That is, goals that do not inspire them. Right? My dad was a guy who was not very lazy. My dad was a guy who was really active, who was always had to have a project to do, and that, you know, although he didn't live to 60 years old, he probably got a lot of stuff done in that period of time before he eventually just like had a sudden heart attack and died, right? He was a really productive guy while he was alive, but he didn't live. There's a lot of guys who are that age of like, you know, maybe about like a little bit younger than, a little bit older, like give or take 5 years older than Tony Robbins. A whole bunch of guys who just like aren't with us anymore, right? And again, this isn't stuff that my dad ever owned. This is stuff that my mom has bought to like create a shrine in his memory, right? And it feels very kind of like Plutonian in that way, right? Moving beyond procrastination to unlimited power. Most people fail in life because they major in minor things. How to unleash the financial genius within you. The meeting of preparation with opportunity generates the offspring we call luck. Turn fear and sabotage into confidence and success. We can change our lives. We can do, have, and be exactly what we wish. So, I mean, if I wish to be a successful astrologer, it just means I just have to put more energy into it, according to Tony Robbins anyways. How to increase your energy, the power of successful relationships. The higher your energy level, the more efficient your body. The more efficient your body, the better you feel, and the more you'll use your talent to produce outstanding results. My dad, you could say that, things are easier for the boomers, but if you have an opportunity as a boomer to take advantage of, to have a success, what you end up doing is you end up creating a source of wealth so that your offspring can be incredible. I have to admit, I'm not very much like my dad. I tend not to work so hard. I tend not to be so motivated. But there's some kind of thing where it's like Pluto as a shadow, right? Carl Jung said that there's this kind of unfortunate thing that the children feel like they are forced to sort of like live in the shadow of their parents, right? They're like in a shadow of a generation that has very much put a lot of energy on this kind of message. I can't, maybe my own individuation process, I have to individuate away from this cultural shadow to say that, like, it's my job to be like, okay, my dad already played this role of basically affirming this whole kind of Tony Robbins perspective, and there's some other side to it that should be fairly obvious. I don't think I should really need to get into that much of an analysis of it. The final breakthrough. I challenge you to make your life a masterpiece. I challenge you to join the ranks of those people who live what they teach, who walk their talk. Program yourself for total success. There's always a way if you're committed. program yourself for total success, vibrant health and energy getting into action. It's your unlimited power to care and to love that it's your unlimited power to care and to love that can make the biggest difference in the quality of your life. This is all, I mean, there's something about this is like, I mean, Tony Robbins, again, is only Venus and Mars and Chiron in Aquarius. It's still a few planets, right? It's still a heavy concentration of Aquarius energy, but it's like, there's something about it where I personally don't have any Aquarius planets, but I can like, there's some you can respect the sense of an other, right? You can respect the sense of a kind of uniquely defined kind of Aquarian who's all about kind of like, you know, making the sacrifices for a kind of idealistic goal to make an improved future so that the people that you care about are well provided for and you're doing a good job to make, you know, the world around you a better place and all this kind of stuff, you know, giving, you know. And this is a success journal, which, as you can see, is... Oh, there's something written in it. But I don't think this is this is probably whoever owned this stuff beforehand. 3 positive neuro associations. Pleasure, public speaking. Pleasure, being attractive. The right clothes, wearing the right clothes, making money. Associating pleasure with dressing well, making money, and public speaking. Pain. Pain association, mother's face. Rejection. Sabotaging to not look good. So this is, whoever owned this was very much, had some sort of association with, with clothing or whatever, and looking good. Oh, there's something back from 2011 in here. Do at least 1 month gluten-free, buy bread today, and look for alternatives, figure out lunch. Oh, well, okay, this could be my mother trying to be, my mother being into Tony Robbins, maybe. Maybe I should not get into this. There's something about Pluto, Mars, the topic of power, the topic of personal empowerment, that I have to say, there's this association that comes up with me about, there's this guy that I haven't read that I have to admit that I'm kind of turned off by, because the association to the pickup artist scene. What's his name? The guy who does like the Laws of Power or something like that. And apparently like 50 Cent and like these rap guys are really into him or something. But he kind of comes off. I don't know this. I can't know his name off my top of my head. But he seems. It's just an association that like kind of like I don't really. It's like if you have to. If you're so like unsuccessful with dating that you have to get into that in the first place, it kind of is not a good vibe, or like the kind of people who would like recommend that is like, to me that's a bit like, that stuff is a bit of a red flag. But nonetheless, I mean, there's also like apparently his wife did this movie called The Love Witch, which some people, I don't know. Although I'm not very familiar with that. There's something about like putting a lot of focus on personal power and, you know, unlimited success and all this, which to me draws a certain kind of suspicion. There's this whole thing about like the ethos of trust and the ethos of suspicion, but I can't help for this life coach industry, or like self-empowerment gurus and that kind of stuff to have a certain degree of contrarianism, right? Or a certain degree of, we're going for a Mars-Pluto oppositionalism, right? It's not something that motivates me, that I have positive emotions associated with, right? What I think is I try to do in my astrology channel is not to waste too much time talking about things that I don't like, focusing on things that I am upset about, or things that may stir up in me this kind of confrontational, contrarian attitude. Instead, I focus on what I find to be personally inspiring. And you can take this whole attitude of, empowerment and stuff like that, and spin it the other way. And James Hillman, you just have to like redirect the energy into a more Hillmanian direction, and all of a sudden you got something that actually has some value, if you ask me, right? And then similarly, I've recently been getting into Byung Han, and Byung Han is approaching this not from the position, like, look, Tony Robbins is a self-empowerment life coach guru. James Hillman is a psychologist who worked directly under the tutelage of the one and only Carl Jung, directly, right? So he's got he's first-hand experience working with the man himself in direct lineage of the Jungians. And Byung-Chul Han is a German-Korean philosopher, very much influenced by Heidegger and Nietzsche and continental philosophy, right? And the thing is, when you come at it, when it comes to philosophy, I appreciate philosophy because even as much as I like James Hillman, it gives you a different way to get into it, right? A different approach into the problem, right? And that it's not really like either one being right and the other being wrong. It's just people approaching the same problem from different angles, right? And there's something about specifically the Byung-Chul Han thing, that Byung-Chul Han defines power in a very specific... There's different definitions of power in these books, right? James Hillman defines power in this book as the ability to get work done, right? If you think about it like this, that you've got, at a very mechanical level, you've got your body digests food, burns calories, produces energy, and if you are taking a walk, you're moving your legs, you're burning energy to get your ass from one place to another, getting work done, or else you are, if you have you have a vehicle or something like that, then that is displacing the work that you're doing onto a machine who's getting that work done in a more efficient way, right? So you have technology as something that grants us more power by being extensions of our own, rather than putting a hamburger in your belly and moving your legs, you're putting your gas in your car and making your car go, right? And that the idea of work and employment and all this, James Hillman's, this book is written kind of like for the workplace, in a kind of like people who are, it's written for a kind of a business audience, right? It's kind of like written as a kind of like a pop psychology book for people who are in the workplace, but Hillman is himself a bit of a Mars, it goes good with this Mars retrograde, because Hillman is a kind of a Marsy oriented contrarian who's not just going to let you fall asleep at the wheel with the status quo. Hillman's always going to be throwing unexpected shit at you that you're not going to see coming, right? You're not going to be like, I wasn't expecting him to, a Jungian to be like this, right? So Hillman defines power as the ability to get work done, and that could be your own body getting work done, or the ability to delegate work to other people, or the ability to have access to technology that gets work done more efficiently. But it's all about like having the ability to either delegate tasks to accomplish things, whether that you're doing that yourself or you have power over others to get things done. And then also the ability to resist, right? Because Hillman also says that if there's no resistance, there's no power, right? If there's somebody who if you need to get something done, but people don't want to do it, and you have the ability to say, it doesn't matter what you think, what you want, you're getting it done because we need to, and it's my say, then you have power to get a certain job done, right? That you have a power to accomplish, you are empowered. And there's also, if you look at how the idea of empowerment is defined, it's like, there are certain things that, like, people don't have the authority to do. Like, for example, I'll just use this example, like a state of emergency. If you declare a state of emergency, that empowers you to do a certain number of actions that you wouldn't be able to do if it wasn't a state of emergency, right? But like and that is the power to, like, directly say these are things we need to do whether you want to do them or not, and you must, and have that kind of power, right? The Byung-Chul on the other hand, approaches it from a different angle, which is this. Byung-Chul approaches it from the perspective of recognizing a kind of like in-group power, the idea of he puts it in the way of recognizing the self in the other, right? And the idea that if you have people on a team, and you could look at, like, let's just, I'm using the idea of a team loosely because, you could have teams in all kinds of contexts. But the basic idea of a team is that a team is a group of people working towards the same goal, right? And you'll have a leader of the team who is directing the actions of the team members, but it basically functions on this idea that, like, if by winning, everybody on the team wins, right? So you don't have to, like, you have a single objective that you can all agree that we are working towards, and for the sake of working towards that similar goal or outcome, we see ourselves as a single unit, right? And if we achieve a victory together, we all win because we're all achieving this goal that we agree on is the thing that we want, right? Now, if there's inner divisions in the team where some team members have no interest in achieving a certain goal, and maybe even see that goal as being counter or opposite to what their wishes are, then what you've got is you don't have the thing operating as a single unit. You have a resistance which is there to be overcome, or a resistance that says, like, we don't identify with this, right? We identify with a different will that wants to do something else, and that you are trying to make us do what you want to achieve your ends, and we want to do something else. But there's some kind of, like, underlying thing with this, in that there's always this kind of pressure to conform, right? Because if you, even at the most kind of I think this goes with Pluto, because Pluto can be kind of like unconscious and like subliminal. Like, even at the most subliminal level, like if you're just walking down the street and you see a bunch of people that are like dressed the same way as you, that look like they're living lives that are similar as you can say, oh, these people, these are people that are like me. They want the same things in life. There's a pretense of friendliness because there's a sense that we're probably all on the same team and that we all want the same thing. But if you feel like the people around you are inherently other to you and may not want the same things as you do, or that see you as being a kind of a competitive threat, that we are all just competing for the same piece of the pie, and that what is good for you is not good for everybody else, then you're instead of having the opportunity for being a cohesive group that all acts together in the same interests, you are a bunch of people who are kind of afraid, or in this kind of like competitive survival mentality, where instead of seeing all the people around you as being part of a uniform society that agrees on the same goals and the same things they want, you see a bunch of people with competing interests who have to fight each other, and there's a kind of like this chaos of this kind of jungle mentality of just one will versus the other, right? I'm just saying, in my own life, there could be certain things like do I have to bring the I don't really sure how to tie this in with Tony Robbins, but I'm just thought this is more of just like a freestyle riff on the topics of power. I thought I would also just to shift gears a bit here, there's a certain thing about what I was saying about the uniformity of and the us and them in grouping and stuff like that. There's something that happened recently in the news about the news in the New Zealand or New Zealand in general. There's these big protests where the indigenous people are protesting a reinterpretation of the agreement of the colonial settlers with the indigenous people that serves as a, like the bill. I guess it's sort of like similar to like the founding documents that people use to do up a chart for like, how they use the Declaration of Independence for the nation of the United States of America, that there are similar like documents that have to do with indigenous treaties that are being called into questions that were like the founding of New Zealand that are under question right now. And I think this is kind of interesting because it's like kind of like the root, the digging up this sort of like underlying thing that goes with the structures of power, right? And structures of organization and hierarchy and all this kind of stuff like that. And there's something that I thought this was really interesting because I made this video recently where I was talking about, you may remember a recent video where I brought out this book and waved it around, the Ken Wilber Integral Psychology, right? And I was talking about how there are, one thing that Ken Wilber, I think, had this thing where he was being kind of at first friendly with Jordan Peterson because there's a certain kind of developmental attitude that Ken Wilber takes that sees one developmental level building on each other in a progressive hierarchical kind of way. And in that point of view, that places the level of development that indigenous people were at a lower level than being a rational materialist. And there's this kind of like very basic. And he criticizes this problem. He talked with pluralism being that like with this idea that no one thing is better than anything else and everything is equally superior. But like there's basically this kind of what you get down to is this underlying level of like violence, basically what might makes right. And there's this kind of thing that like if you have two civilizations, a advanced civilization that has technology like weapons and gunpowder and more complex, advanced systems of organizing military and stuff like that, and you've got a comparatively less technologically developed society, you could say that like the ability to develop implements of destruction, war and destruction, is maybe not all that civilized, but in this, without just calling it a spade for it is what it is that at this brute level of just like, we will conquer you with brute force. It's unfortunately, if somebody has more advanced weapons, they have more advanced weapons, they have more advanced technology on that level, right? But it's not, this is still kind of like, it's kind of like the sort of like, if you go back to like Genghis Khan and like the Roman Empire, and you had these people that were basically just like, whatever army conquers the other wins, has this kind of like there's this kind of like this underlying brute power that is like this, is not very sophisticated and is not kind of advanced, but it is this kind of like underlying thing, right? The idea is that as we develop away from that, and there's more of an inclination towards trying to be peaceful, about trying to be cooperative and this kind of stuff, right? The idea of pluralism, I don't know, there's this big hang up too where recently in the British Columbian elections locally where I lived, a conservative got in trouble for the same thing of like, there's a woman who was interviewing a conservative candidate, and the woman just mentioned that she was doing indigenous studies in school, and the conservative candidate basically poo-pooed her whole academic career, saying like, you're spending your life learning about, this pluralistic, indigenous study thing, and it's all just a bunch of, it's all, they don't have any knowledge. They were savages. Like, she literally said this and she didn't end up winning the election in her riding, but there was a kind of a but there wasn't much dialogue around this that I saw anyways. But this kind of relates, it was interesting, you saw that happen, And then right after I made this video where I was talking about this kind of developmental process and the idea of a pluralistic approach that recognizes multiple perspectives, there was this thing in the New Zealand government where the Maoris were doing this big protest, right? They were doing this thing called the Haka. I'm not going to, you probably are familiar with it. I probably don't have to go into the, probably don't have to go into the details about it. But there's something about this, the way that Pluto being this sort of like raw power, right? This raw, bringing, and not like trying to like reject that thing about like the raw power of a primitive people, or I mean, even using the word primitive, I don't know if that gets me in trouble, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like there's something about there's a kind of a real kind of like energetic force or energetic strength that is present there that I think really goes with Mars and Pluto. And there's something that it's been stimulating, just the whole, I just thought it was interesting, maybe it's just better not to read the comment section, first of all, but I just find it interesting, the whole political landscape around this, because you have a lot of people who are, I don't know if it's just racism, like, is it just calling it a spade? Like, there are actually a lot of racist people that just react, because there's, on one hand, there are people that are like, I think it's been complicated, because before we were so developed, right? Before we were so advanced in how we understood these things, you had things like James Hillman, good old James Hillman, a Jungian, was one of the guys who did the Jungian men's groups, and with people like Michael Meade, Robert Bly, those guys, and they would get together and beat the drum circles, and they would read some Rumi poetry and do. And now there's just there's something about progressive politics that I feel like ran into this kind of logjam around cultural appropriation, which is like these guys would bring on they didn't want to make it just a white guy club. They involved people like Malidoma Some from Africa. They tried to, they were of course using like Sufi poetry that was, but white academic guys were translating this. There's this whole kind of thing that maybe feels a bit kind of like faux pas or a bit passé, because it's like the being like just a white person who likes Rumi, kind of like there's a certain kind of like multiculturalism to do kind of a multicultural spiritual perspective that I was raised with because I was Unitarian, that has kind of fallen out of favor, right? And what you see now is you see a very like there's something that like both the progressives and the conservatives seem to agree on, which is like a kind of a conformity to this kind of ethnocentric traditionalism, right? Where instead of being like, Christianity is so bogus, I'll become a Buddhist and that'll solve my problems, right? Now people are kind of disenchanted with this idea, and they think that you're just running off to some, exotic, esoteric other thing, and that if you really want to, be authentic, right? You want to be the real deal. You want to be authentic. You got to get in touch with your own factual, honest to God ancestry. Who were your ancestors? What religion do they practice? What were their actual traditions, right? And when you also approach this thing through paganism and all this kind of stuff, like I have Eastern European ancestry, and there's you find out that there's these funny old like I've got a bunch of Polish ancestors, and there are these Polish whisperer ladies. Like there's funny, like you don't have to run on to another culture. You got these weird kind of witchy pagan people in your own heritage, right? You don't have, but there's something there's something about all this which has been like, I've noticed that so traditional conservative types have this sort of appreciation of like, instead of instead of this neoliberal, rational, secular, you know what I'm saying? Like we have our modern secular multicultural society, and it's like both the progressives and the conservatives agree that you shouldn't go and appropriate other people's cultures. You should just get into your own culture. But there's this kind of interesting thing, is because like I notice, especially with the Jungian men's group crowd, there's always been this attitude where the Jungian men want to get like in touch with their inner wild man, right? They want to like beat the drums. They want to like sit around the campfire and like, oh, right? Like that's a very strong kind of dynamic in the and there's something about that where when you make this big problem about the cultural appropriation thing, they say that like it becomes this thing that like I'm going to make a criticism here, right? That there's something about, you take people where they're at, right? You have to, if you accept people at the level they're at and not get so hung up on judging, you can say you got a group of people who are at some basic level could share a sympathy to people from other cultures who are maybe less developed, right? And then from that you could have a kind of a brotherhood which is not defined by, racial identity or defined by settler colonial status. There is this kind of thing where I'm not completely defending these white guys who want to wear headdresses and stuff like that, right? But there's some level, if you don't judge people so much and accept that like there's some potential, like budding seed of like multicultural appreciation, like where you got like some old hippie that wants to read Rumi, like we've created this society where we discourage that. From the progressives say you're just appropriating and exploiting other cultures, and the conservatives say that you're insulting your ancestors. You just have to like honor the ancestors and all that. And so there's this kind of thing where like, and then when you look at I find it funny though, because then when you get the Maori people who are really embracing their own that kind of quality of their own heritage, you've got this weird thing now where it seems like conservative white people, they want to have like a Jungian's men's group where they get to do their own Haka. They go, oh, I'm a big tough guy and beat my chest and stuff. Like they don't, but then they're like, oh, the woke people will cancel me for doing that, or like I'm, you know what I'm saying, or that like or like it'll trigger some sort of like the Maoris will hate me because I'm appropriating them. I don't even know if I want to do, like I relate to this myself, but like it's been on my mind anyways, right? I just find it odd because there's like there's this traditional conservative thing that's like underneath it we're just wild men in the bush, hunter-gatherers, the there's this paleo-conservative attitude, right? But then when you get like the Maoris doing this thing, everybody's just like, oh, are these like the New Zealand version of AOC? Right? Because it's like for them it's coded as this like multicultural pluralistic thing, and they have to be all like, like there's some kind of like attitude where you're just we have to like create a we have to like be sensitive and listen to people, and like we don't want some indigenous person being angry and beating their chest is threatening, so we have to treat these people as an other that are like these people want to take the piece of the pie back that we took from them, so we have to like be in these two, be like Game of Thrones, where you guys get that coat of arms, we get that coat of arms, and we all go kill each other, right? You're like, no, like no, we don't actually want that, right? But it's just kind of, do you understand? Like, is there something weird? I guess maybe it's the same thing that people like point out that like you've got these like people that are like Islamophobia as well, who are like people who are traditional fundamentalist Christians who have a problem with people who are really fundamentalist Muslim, right? But the thing is, it's like if you actually analyze where they're coming from, they're both actually might be really religious fundamentalist, but it brings me to this other point that I've been considering, that we like the word radical, right? The word radical is connected to the word radish, the root, to get to the root of something, right? To get to the root, there's some sort of the root of the problem, or getting into your roots, right? And the idea of conflicts, power struggles, right? It seems interesting to me that oftentimes the most conflicts are between things which share some kind of a common root, right? Because all these wars and conflicts, for example, like the thing that's in going on in the Middle East. We have the real, there seems to be, I don't know, there can be religious, I guess it's not the same thing. There have been conflicts between Buddhists and Muslims and stuff like that. But it's like, this is kind of idea that like Christianity, Jews, and Muslims all believe in the same God, the same Abrahamic religion. There's the same root under all this kind of stuff, right? And that it's strange that like there can be so much conflict between like, it's like there are different forms which are somehow, they may have more in common that they agree on metaphysically or in a theological sense but it's like which, do you, yeah, I don't know. I don't really get into a big theological discussion about this one. But the idea that like there's some basic inherent kind of multicultural, pluralistic attitude in Carl Jung, right? In Jungianism. Because it saw that you had your own specific, particular stories, myths, scriptures from different traditions, but that you could look at it from a universal perspective. You could see that certain archetypes repeated themselves in different cultures, and that created a basis for a kind of a commonality where you could like include the other. This is what I'm trying to say about the Byung Chul Han thing, is that the power is like the ability to see yourself in the other, right? And it's just kind of interesting because there's like a power that comes from like overcoming plurality, right? Where you can there's this kind of idea that we're all just on the same team. We're all just like, we're all, co-passengers on spaceship Earth or something like that. But then there seems to be this contradiction where like the more you basically agree that we are under the same, because like, a lot of these people that have the same religion where they believe a one God religion, right? We all believe in the same God and we all can agree on, but then there seems to be, that doesn't make people more united, it makes people more divided. In some way that's kind of ironic, right? Because you would think that like we have more power the more we unite together, and this is what there's this. I have a pet peeve with the New Age because it's like New Age platitudes, right? Like people don't really think about things; they just kind of like you find an in-group that has a certain kind of like platitudes you like, and if you know which platitude to say, people will. You score brownie points for just repeating the things people like to hear. Oh, this guy must be like us. He says the same things, right? But no, people don't actually like to think about these things, right? This idea that you're like, oh, they just, there's so much division in the world. There's so much polarization, right? But the things that are the most polarized are the things which we actually agree on things, right? There are certain things where it's not really a dichotomy at all. These people, like, they're just you're basically at roots. Like you have one kind of fundamentalist going to war against another kind of fundamentalist, and maybe most of the things they agree on, but they have this kind of thing where they're like they can't get out of it, right? They, like the fact that they agree on so much just makes it more important why they can't let the other person win, right? Like if you had a different situation where you guys were complete opposite or completely foreign. Where you didn't have this thing, where instead of having a bunch of people who all agree on the same one God, one universe, everything, this is what reality is. If you had somebody, we've never heard of this. We have our, we have our pagan gods, and we have all these other, like there could be like, they're like, then you're a real other, right? You're a real other that has their own, that you're like, but when you have a whole bunch of people that like agree with you kind of, but not really, there's something like that makes it more of a problem than having people which are just legitimately not even on the same page as you at all, right? And I think which is interesting about what the problem about pluralism is that these people, it's not making this argument to say that like we have a certain degree of science and technology. It goes very much with Aquarius, like development, right? We have we're empowering ourselves for increased science, just trying to tie all this loose threads up, right? It's empowering yourself through increased technology, advancement, progress, and all this kind of stuff. And there's this idea of, it's not saying that you don't get an advantage from having technology, or you don't get an advantage from all this, Aquarian structure of civilization and progress. It's not an advantage over a more archaic or less advanced kind of society, right? There's these advantages that come with it, right? But there's this idea that, like, to be able to respect the what's the right word for this? Respect. It's like the Buber, the I thou. Respect the agency and respect the will and autonomy of a people who are where they are at, and not just seeing them as something to conquer and subjugate and to with power to be like, because there's this whole thing about the system of what we consider, like, the idea of, like, if you have a whole bunch of people that agree, okay, this is God, this is the universe, this is everything, so that means you have to do everything the way we do because we know what God is. So all you people have to, submit yourselves to what we say because we are right, because we are the ones who know it all, and that gives us we're self-justified in killing everybody else and just through brute power, making our will, because in our fundamentalist wacky if we can do it, then that God means he must be on our side, right? And this is why religious fundamentalism is kind of crazy, right? And you want to be like, you could do that, but there's also something, isn't there this idea of, like, mercy being, like, merciful to being compassionate, and not just trying to use this kind of, like, Genghis Khan kind of, like, we're just going to conquer all of you and make you do what we want you to do, so we have power. I don't know. This is a bit of, I'm letting out some ideas that have been circulating in my head recently. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting the channel. Thank you to my new people who followed. Please like and subscribe. Tell all your friends. Spread the good news. Dan's Astrology is here to stay. Thank you very much.